Well, hi everybody. It's Becky with New Hampshire Audubon, and we're here with a live Q&A to talk about birds and nature and butterflies and anything else that's on your mind. It looks like technology is working, but if anybody is there and can let me know if you can hear me and if you can see me, that would be great. I have a terrible track record with these live Q&As, always running into technological issues. So if anybody is there, please say hi and let me know. That would be great. I'm hoping that you can hear me and the microphone's working. And I'll look forward to hearing from somebody that you can hear me. And we've got a lot going on in the bird world right now. And summertime is breeding time, and it's a fun time of year to have birds around. Hi, Krista, can you hear me okay? If you can, let me know. That would be great. Oh, good. Thank you, Krista. All right. So I'll actually talk since I know you can hear me. Um, I wanted to start first off with a question that we've gotten a number of, and I think I've talked about before, but we'll go over it again. And that's what do you do when a bird is flying and pecking at your window? One of my coworkers has a cardinal that is just flying at her window. It's pecking at the window. It's not bonking into it like it can't see it. It's just flying at it and pecking at it, and it goes to other windows on our house as well. And what's happening is that this poor male cardinal is seeing his reflection in the window, and he thinks that there's a rival bird in his territory. So he's trying to drive away this rival bird, and so he's flying at it, trying to make it go away, and trying to peck at it and say, "This is my territory. I don't want you here." And of course, his rival is not going away. So he keeps coming back again and again and again. So this is something, not all birds do it. All birds do have territories, at least songbirds like cardinals and the small birds that we have around our yards. They have territories and they'll defend those territories. But flying and pecking at windows seems to be kind of individualistic. You know, you'll have lots of cardinals around, it'll never happen, and then all of a sudden, one of the cardinals, some individual male, sees his reflection and he just flies and pecks at the window. And uh, what can you do about it? Well, the best thing to do is cover the outside surface of the window so he can't see his reflection. You can temporarily tape up something like newspaper or cardboard. Sometimes screens will work. Um, and you can try the fake snow stuff, the glass wax, to spray on the window to dull the reflection. Once a bird has learned that that rival appears in that window, he'll keep coming back again and again. So really covering it up is the only thing that works reliably. Other than cardinals, we've seen robins do that. Crows will do that. Trying to think what other species, but those are the most common ones that we get reported flying and pecking at the windows. So hopefully it won't happen to you, but if it does, that's what to work on and to try and dull that reflection in the outside surface of the window. I keep stressing the outside surface of the window because the bird is not trying to get in, so it doesn't matter what you do on the inside of the window, closing drapes or anything like that. The reflection is still there, so you need to dull that reflection. Now, this kind of flying and pecking at the window is very different than when birds fly into the windows at high speed because they see the reflection of the trees and they think they're flying into the trees. That's a totally different kind of problem. It's still the same, they're seeing the reflection, so breaking up the reflection is an important thing to do. And there's actually some companies that are starting to make bird-friendly glass to help with that issue. But the bird flying and pecking at the window where it's not going at high speed, it's not hurting itself, it's just fluttering against the window, that's when it's trying to drive away its rival male. So what other questions? Let me know if you have anything on your mind. Send along a question. If there's anything that you'd like to have answered, that'd be great. I'm going to chat a little bit about what's happening in the bird world right now, other than birds flying and pecking at the windows. This is the time of year when young birds are fledging, and that means that they have got enough flight feathers that they can actually fly and leave the nest. Some birds who have two broods in the season, two nesting attempts, they'll nest early and they'll have a second one. They've already had one brood fledge, and they may be working on another brood. But young birds are all around, and they're learning to fly, they're learning to feed themselves, and they look very, very different than the adults. Young birds don't get that full adult plumage right away. So they have what's called a immature or juvenile plumage. Actually, there's two different ones. There's a juvenile plumage and an immature plumage. And both of them look very different from the adults. Um, some of the young birds in the nest, they're all downy and fuzzy. That's a real juvenile plumage. But then they grow their first set of feathers and they look. Oh, let's use the robin as an example. They're the same size as the adults. They have the brown back, but their breast is reddish with spots. So that's their immature plumage. They don't look like the adults yet, but they have feathers and they can fly. And then they will molt again this fall into more adult plumage. And so we can have birds around, baby birds around that you might look at and say, gosh, I've never seen that bird before. And that's because it's a young bird that looks very different than the adults. And if you have chipping sparrows in your yard, which is a common small bird, with the adults have a rusty cap and a black line through their eye and white right above the eye, a clear whitish breast and brownish back. The juveniles, the young birds, immatures after they've left the nest and they're fledged, have all streaks all over their breast. They don't have a reddish crown or anything like that. So they look really different. And the best way to kind of figure out what they might be is to look and see if they're hanging out with the adults. And oftentimes they are. Oftentimes young birds are in family groups, so the adults will still be around. So that can be one clue. Sometimes size and shape can be another clue. But also going on right now is the adults, if they've finished nesting, for things like our songbirds, are also starting to molt. So sparrows and warblers and rose-breasted grosbeaks and cardinals and blue jays and things like that. The adults themselves go through a full molt. That means they replace all of their feathers. And sometimes they can look very strange when they're in molt. They may be missing some feathers. Um, there may be the the plumage that they're molting into may be a winter plumage, and that may look different than the summer plumage. So you can have a bird that's kind of half and half. And the scarlet tanager is one of those birds that does that. The male is bright red in the summer with black wings, but in the wintertime, he's a greenish, yellowy, sort of yellowy greenish color, still with the black wings. And at this time of year, he's molting into that greenish plumage, and you can see birds that are part red, part yellowy green. They have different colored feathers in different parts of their body. So it can be very puzzling. What is that? Doesn't look quite like a scarlet tanager. What could it be? So these are all things that are going on right now at this time of year. So you can have young birds that look different. You can have adults molting that also look different. So can there can be some sort of strange looking birds out there. And when you're trying to figure them out, that can be a challenge. And one of the things that's best to do is actually to try and take a picture of the bird. And you can send it to New Hampshire Audubon, send it to our volunteer naturalists. Their email is birds, etc., BIRDSETC at nhaudubon.org. Send along the picture and we'll do our best to try and identify it for you and let you know what it is. Even poor photos can be identified. So don't hesitate, snap a picture, send it along. Again, it's birds, etc. at nhaudubon.org, and we'll do our best to identify it for you. Uh, Now, one of the other things that we see at this time of year and into the fall are these bald-headed birds. And it's kind of related to that molt that I was talking about. Sometimes they've molted all their head feathers and they haven't grown new head feathers in yet. And something like a cardinal has black skin. So you look at a red bird with a tiny, small black head, and they look so strange. They're really bizarre looking birds. And sometimes we think that there are feather mites that they cause problems with and weaknesses with the feathers, particularly on the head, because that's a place that the birds cannot groom. Their bill doesn't reach the feathers on the head. And birds do groom themselves. They'll use their bill to groom their feathers and to pick away parasites. They may take dust baths, and they have an oil gland that they can use to to help spread some oil on their feathers to help the feather health. But they can't get to their heads, so feather mites can be on their heads, cause their feathers to be weak and and fall out or break off before new feathers have grown in. And this may be especially common, we think, in young birds, um, where they're in a nest and there are a number of young birds, siblings with them, and it's an environment where feather mites may be quite common. So birds with black heads can be puzzling and can be hard to identify. But keep that in mind. Blue jays is another one that we get reports of on a regular basis with no feathers on their heads. And again, they look very, very strange with a dark head. So keep your eye out for that, but hopefully you'll be able to figure out from the rest of the feathers what the bird is. All right. Well, again, hi everybody. It's Becky from New Hampshire Audubon, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to send them along to me. I'd be happy to try and answer them. Um, we've got lots going on in the bird world with birds nesting, and I want to mention a little bit more um, about bird molt because it's a very, very interesting topic and not something that we usually know a lot about, but because so much is, well, I shouldn't say we don't know a lot about it. We do know quite a bit about bird molt, but each species is individual. There are some patterns that are common to groups of species, but sometimes a species will have its own unique molt pattern. But we were talking about songbirds and how this is the time of year where they're molting all their feathers. The adults are, and the young birds will also molt. So you've got a lot of new feather growth going on, and they need a lot of energy to do that. And they do it now when there are lots of insects food around for our small songbirds. So it's a good season with lots of food for their molt. And they molt now, and then the songbirds, some of them, as we know, fly south for the winter. They'll be in their winter plumage. And then in the spring, our small songbirds molt their body feathers again, and they're into breeding plumage. So we have this wintering plumage and a breeding plumage, and sometimes the birds look very different in winter and in spring. And coming up, we'll have the confusing fall warbler season when our warblers, which are small, colorful birds, typically in the summertime in their breeding plumage, are into the immature plumage or winter plumage, and they can look very different and very confusing. So molt is fascinating. One of the things that you'll notice at this time of year, if you're a someone who likes ducks, is that it seems like the male ducks disappear. And what happens is with ducks is that they molt all their wing feathers at once. So they go through a flightless period. And during that period, they've also molted all their bright, brilliant breeding plumage. So you get lots of what I call brown ducks, very dull looking female, looks a lot like females most of the time. And these are actually the males in what they call eclipse plumage, where they're, looking like females, like young ducks. They all kind of look the same, and they're better camouflaged. They don't stand out at a time when they can't fly. So it's a protective um, mechanism for them so that they can molt safely, molt their wing feathers before they molt again into their bright breedings plumage, their spring plumage. So, all right, don't hesitate to send in any questions if you've got them. I'm pleased to have the technology working well, so this is great. Let me know what kind of birds you've seen nesting around in your yard. I know this is also the time of year when hawks are starting to fledge, and young hawks, when they first leave the nest, continue to be fed by their parents, even though they can fly. So you'll have young hawks, and they're just learning about the world, and sometimes they are quite bold. I don't know if bold is the right word. They don't know enough to be afraid. So they may sit on your back railing or right in your backyard, and the adults will come in and feed them. Oftentimes, the young hawks will squawk a lot, make a lot of noise so that the adults know where they are, and the adults know that they're hungry, so that they can bring in food for them. And it's a form of begging, but it's also a form of letting them know where the young hawks are. And sometimes the siblings will stay near each other and sometimes not. Some are more bold and adventurous and will be flying a little bit more. Sometimes when they are first learning to fly, they're not very good at landing. So sometimes they land on the ground instead of in the trees. And then they'll sort of figure out how to take off and how to get up into the trees. And sometimes the adults can be very defensive, and that this is the time of year when they're most likely to be really defensive because the young are so vulnerable. So if you do have hawks around, just be aware of that. There are a couple of hawk species, particularly northern goshawks, that are known to be quite defensive of their nests and actually hit people in the head. So just be alert and be aware. If you've got hawks around in the neighborhood, most of the time it'll be just fine, but you just want to pay attention. Well, and hi, Melanie. You haven't had any orioles for about 3 weeks. Well, this is a time, believe it or not, when the young ones are fledging, they're moving around a lot, and they may actually start migration, believe it or not, in mid-July. But it's quite common for orioles to kind of disappear from feeders. They're feeding a lot on insects that are available, and they may be moving. Once the young can fly, they may move to a different area where they have more insect food, more caterpillar food. But it really is common for them to stop coming to feeders, and that's about the right timing for that, when the young are fledging. And it also can be a time when the adults may be doing some molting, and they're less likely to be out in the open. They're much more likely to be in the dense tree leaves. But I think your experience is that time of year where birds are starting to move around and actually think about migrating. Hi, Amy. Let's see. There are meat building materials. Okay, I'm thinking maybe you need nest building materials. Mean nest building, not meat building. Okay, so nest building materials, yes. Okay, great. Um, There are things that you can put out, and believe it or not, that traditional yarn and string is some of the things that birds will go after. Feathers. If you have somebody who has, chickens, um, and they'll have feathers around, um, when they molt, or if they harvest the chickens and they pluck them and there are feathers. Lots of birds use feathers in their nests. So that can be a fun thing to put out. If you're in an area where you have tree swallows, they like white feathers in their nest, and they'll line them so the feathers actually come up around the eggs and the adults sitting on the nest. Um, so string and feathers. There are also these nesting material balls that you can buy. We sell them in the New Hampshire Audubon Nature Store. You just hang them out and they can come and pull at them. They have wool in them. Sheep wool would be another thing that you could put out. The other thing to keep in mind is that birds build their nests oftentimes with dead, dried leaves, pine needles, grasses. And it's a good reason to not clean up your yard too much. Because if you clean up everything, if you remove all the leaves and all the dead grasses, all little twigs and sticks, then you're limiting the natural nesting material for birds. So leave some of those leaves around, leave some of those dead grasses around. The birds will definitely use them. Another thing that lots of birds use is mud. And I haven't figured out a way to provide this yet, but maybe the idea of putting out a mud puddle, making your own mud puddle. Um, and there are birds, swallows, robins will use mud, phoebes will use mud. So, yes, feather your nest. I like that, Amy. And cat or dog for sure. Any of that, those types of things would be great to put out. And the mud puddle I haven't tried yet, but birds will certainly come to mud puddles that form in a like in a driveway or something like that. And I always imagine if I had I don't know, maybe a big tray where I could put mud in it and then keep it wet, some of the birds might come. It'd be a fun experiment to try to see what would work well. But yeah, great questions. And anything that we can do to sort of help provide nesting materials and nesting sites for birds. And one of the things that many of our yard birds like to nest in are dense shrubs and trees. And sometimes we have a tendency to want to sort of clean up and neaten up our yard, but it's the messy thicket areas that birds often like to nest in. So you can kind of keep that in mind. Maybe you might want to have a corner of your yard that you keep sort of let a tangle of bushes and brush grow up for birds like catbirds and robins um, and little sparrows, chipping sparrows. Um, there are also, what am I thinking of? Oh, these nesting shelves that you can put up for phoebes and for robins, or nest boxes um, that you can put up for some things like chickadees and tufted titmice and white-breasted nuthatches. Anything that you can do to allow a dead tree to stay up. You obviously want it to be safe for the birds, but there are cavity nesting birds. Little chickadees will use dead trees to nest in. So if you have a dead limb or a dead tree trunk that you can leave standing, even if you don't leave the whole thing, but you leave part of it, that can be a great incentive for birds to come and nest. Okay, Amy, you've got a question. And what I think is a hummingbird nest that fell out of a tree. Huh. Wasp or hornet paper. I've not seen that in a nest before. Um, Hummingbirds usually use lichen in their nests. They put it all around the outside of the nest because it helps the nest um, be camouflaged up in the tree and more natural. And so does a bird called a blue-gray gnatcatcher. It will use a lot of lichen on the outside. There's certainly plenty of hornet nests that were active last year that are still sort of hanging in the trees in the early spring. Those nests are not reused. The winter kills the birds, the hornets that are in the nest, and so that the hornets are dead, and that paper could certainly be used in a nest, but I've not seen it before. I'm surprised. Hummingbird nest should be a little tiny nest. Let me look up and see. Sometimes what you can do to identify nests is you can measure them. And looking in one of my resources that will tell me how big a hummingbird nest is, the cup size on the inside. Now we have only ruby-throated hummingbirds here, so let me look up ruby-throated hummingbird and see what size nest we've got. Ruby-throated hummingbird. Okay. A neat cup. Oh no, it gives me the eggs, but not the dimensions of the nest. I need a different book. Well, it's a little teeny tiny nest, but I don't have the dimension for it. I'm sorry, I'll have to get my other book and look that up. But I think it's only, if I remember rightly, only about an inch across the nest itself. On the inside of the cup, not the outside, but the inside of the cup. So take a ruler to it and see what you got. Or if you have a chance, take a picture. Nests can be difficult to identify without the bird at them. Some of them look similar. Some of them have some identifying features. Um, yeah, this fits neatly in my hand, small hand. It also could be a warbler or a small sparrow like the chipping sparrow. Both those have small nests. Um, Vireos tend to use a branch that has a V in it, and they'll put their nest in the V and attach it sort of hanging from the V. But Amy, if you have a chance, you can email the picture to birds, etc. at nhaudubon.org. Send it along, and we'll do what we can to identify it. Sometimes it really helps to know where you found the nest, not only where you live, but what the habitat is that's around you. So when we're trying to identify birds, sometimes it really helps narrow it down if we know what the possibilities are from the habitat. So if you have lots of fields around you, that could bring in some birds. If you are all in the woods, that would be just a little different set of species that might be there. If you're way in the northern part of the state, that's different than if you're way in the southern part of the state. So if you send in the photo, let us know where you live, or at least the town that you live, and what the habitat is like around you. Are you in a neighborhood? Are you out in the woods? Are you on the edge of a field? Are you in downtown Manchester? Are you in um, the wilds of Warner? So send that along. Bowl is 2 inches across. I think that's too big for a hummingbird, but I'll have to check. Think they're small. Let me see. Let me try my other book. Um, my books are in the shelf way in the back there, and I'm at home right now, and I have some other resources in the office. But let's look and see if hummingbirds if it will say for me. Hummingbird. Well, nope. Need different book. So sorry about that. But yep. Oh, all right. Well, sorry, Amy. Um, if you can, can you see inside the cup what it's lined with? If you can, sometimes that helps. But look for that sort of lichen on the outside. That's your hummingbird ticket. But I really do think that 2 inches is too big across. Hummingbirds are very, very tiny birds and have very tiny nests. It seems impossibly so. They could actually hatch little tiny eggs and raise hummingbird young. But I'll look up that measurement. I'll make a note of it, and next time we do a Q&A, I'll have the hummingbird nest measurements. So I'm jotting that down. 2 inches. All right. Great. Well, other than birds, there are some cool things happening right now. And I want to mention at least a moment with butterflies because I was up in northern New Hampshire in Pittsburgh and I had thousands of white admiral butterflies. And this is the time of year when they're out and about, particularly if you happen to be up north. And white admiral butterflies are really easy to identify. They're pretty good size, maybe a couple of inches across, but they are dark with white bands. I'm going to try and show you here. Oops, there we go. This one here, dark with white bands, and it's actually the same species as this red-spotted purple. And the red-spotted purple is more common in the southern part of the state. The white admiral is more common in the northern part of the state. But when white admirals are out, they're out in big numbers, and they like to come to mud after it's rained to get minerals, or they'll be on animal scat that's been left along a road or a trail. So there's something you can look for when you're out. And sometimes at these mud puddles, you have not only just the white admirals, but maybe tiger swallowtails. We had pearl crescents and some other butterflies gathered around. So if you were to try a mud puddle for bird nests, you might actually have butterflies that come as well because they're after those minerals. And this is the time of year when it's great butterfly watching. The butterflies are out on sunny days, and there are some of our more common ones are flying around, and look for them in sort of open field areas where there are lots of different kinds of plants in flower. Daisies are in flower and hawkweed is coming into flower. So it's good butterfly watching time. And it's also about the time of year when we start to see monarchs. And monarch butterflies are pretty well known, but there are a few things about them that are really amazing. And the butterflies that we're seeing now are they're coming back from farther south. So butterflies, the monarch butterflies, winter in in Mexico. Oh, I don't know if you can hear the bird in the background, but there's a Carolina wren calling at my house. But monarch butterflies winter in Mexico, and then they start north in the spring, and one generation begins the journey north. It's continued by the next generation, meaning that the adult has laid eggs, died, the caterpillars grow, they pupate, they become butterflies, they continue journeying north. And it's usually the third generation that gets back to our area. And so we're just starting to see them coming in. And last year was a great year for monarch caterpillars. I saw my first monarch maybe about a week ago. So it's time to start looking for them at milkweed plants. And the caterpillars feed exclusively on milkweed. There are several different kinds of milkweed. Some of them are quite beautiful and make great yard plants, like butterfly weed and swamp milkweed. But the common milkweed is also a plant of fields and roadside edges, and they're easy to find usually. So it's time to start watching for monarch caterpillars to appear, and let's hope we have a good season again. And then in the fall, the butterflies that are here will fly all the way down to Mexico. So when they come north, it takes several generations. When they go south, it's just one butterfly. They'll go to Mexico, winter over, and start the journey back north, but won't make it all the way back. So they are fascinating butterflies. So I think, what else did I want to talk about? Anything else? Interest in particular? Any other questions out there? We're getting ready to wrap it up here. And Amy, I see that you have nothing inside the cup, no lining, so that won't be of any help with the nest ID. So, all right. Well, thank you everybody for joining me on this morning Q&A. And save your questions and send them on in. And again, if you have a picture you want to send for identification, send it to birds, etc., BIRDSETC @nhaudubon.org. You can also post a message on Facebook too with a photo. The volunteer naturalist will take a look at it there as well. Either way will work for us. Again, I'm Becky with New Hampshire Audubon, and thank you all for joining me. And save those questions for next time. And we really appreciate any support that you can send to us. You can make donations on our website. Very much appreciated this challenging time. I hope you are all well, and I hope the birds bring you joy and help you through this interesting COVID-19 experience. Thanks all.